Good morning, Christ Hold Fast. My name is Bruce Hillman. I'm pastor at Hillside Lutheran Brethren Church in northern New Jersey. I'm a contributor to Christ Hold Fast, and it's Thursday, and that means, of course, we are in the book of Ecclesiastes. Well, you may have heard the saying, the proverb, not from the book of Proverbs, that if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. And that points very well to what the text that we're going to be talking about today has to say to us. That is the idea of God's sovereignty. And we're going to be looking at this idea from two contrasting points of view. An old problem in theology that, in fact, never has been solved. What is the relationship between divine sovereignty on the one hand? God is all-knowing, he's all-powerful, he can accomplish his will and work, and human responsibility on the other hand. There's this other sense where we're responsible agents, and we have to, we can do certain things that seem to butt against divine sovereignty. So, for example, God is the one who saves us by grace, and yet we have this freedom to be able to say no. And what do we do with that? So Jesus says at one point in the Gospels, he overlooks Jerusalem, and he says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, oh, how I would gather you up as a hen would gather her chicks, but you would not have it. So what does that mean for us? You have a sovereign, all-powerful God, and yet we're able to say no. And in the midst of that relationship between divine sovereignty and human responsibility, which is ultimately mysterious, we have to ask ourselves, how can we relate to this God? How can we find joy in this God? That's what we're going to talk about a little bit today in Ecclesiastes 3, and the text this morning is 9 through 15. And this is what it says. What gain has a worker from his toil? I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's hearts. Yet, so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I perceive that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it, so that people fear before him. That which is already has been, that which is to be already has been, and God seeks out what has been driven away. End of reading. Well, we are back to the question, of course, that's been driving the whole book from chapter 1, verse 3, which is, what does a man gain? Of course, he's going to add a new element to this question now this morning. But again, what does a man gain from all his toil and all his work and all the things that he struggles with when in the end everything just repeats itself and he can't have any lasting effects on the world? But now we learn something new, a new element that's been added into the mix of this story of us pursuing gain. He says, also, God has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. So what does it mean when he says that he's put eternity into our hearts? Well, what it means is that God has given to us, humanity, a sense of tense, the idea of past, present, and future. And this is what gives us a unique way of living, say, compared to or in contradistinction to animal life. We have a transcendent quality about us, or a transcendental quality about us. We can, in our minds, go back and be nostalgic and remember things. We also can go forward into the future and we can think about things. And beyond that, we actually can be moved by these things. We can remember things in the past and they can make us emotional, or we can look forward to the future and that can make us worried. We have this transcendental quality to us. God has put eternity into our hearts. God, that is, has put a sense of tense into our hearts, past, present, future. Not true of animals, by the way. My dog Winston, he's great, but he doesn't sit there and remember nostalgically the fun walks that we took, and he's not upstairs right now thinking about what's going to happen next week or the week after. God has put eternity, tense, transcendent quality in us so that we can relate to him. That means that we have an understanding of the times. And that's what we talked about last week, right? There's a time for everything and everything under the sun. There's a time to do this, a time to do that. But here's the problem. We have an understanding of the times. We have a transcendental quality about the times. But we do not control the times, and we cannot control the times. And there is something that is in the way that creates a problem for us. And that something is actually someone. It's God. God is in the way of our plans. We have this ability to project into the future, and we think that if we work and we do all these things in the present, we'll be able to get that future that we want. But in fact, the times are not determined by us. We don't get to pick the future. God picks the future. But there's this other statement that's made about God in the future, and it says, he has made everything beautiful in its time. The Hebrew word for beautiful there is the same way that's described David's daughters in the Psalms. It literally means comely, beautiful. God is present in all the times, and God gives all the times. And because God is present in all the times always have a sense of beauty in them because God is in them. But more than that, God is doing work in all the times. But here's where the sovereignty, human responsibility problem starts to enter in. If we read a little bit down, starting in verse 14, it says, I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it so that people fear before him. That which is already has been, that which is to be already has been, and God seeks what has been driven away. God, I know this is hard to hear, believe it or not, God actually gets in the way of our plans. Isn't that a terrible thing of him? He gets in the way of my plans and he gets in the way of your plans because he is the sovereign God who ordains the times. And Koheleth, the writer of Ecclesiastes, says, in a sense, this causes us great fear because God already seems like an enemy to our will be done because he is the one who makes the times. And he makes all the times, which means even if we're going through a difficult season or a bad season or a season where we are victims of evil, we cannot escape the reality that while God is not the author of evil, God at times uses evil for his purposes. And ultimately that's a mystery, and ultimately it causes a fear and a respect of God. But in the midst of that reality that God is sovereign and that God is ordaining the times, the good times and the bad times, we learn two things. The first is that we learn that God is present in the times with us. And the second thing that we learn is that he is making all things beautiful in its time. That is, God is redeeming all things. He is working all things out for the good of those who love him. He is using evil sometimes to draw us to himself, or to find his strength in our weakness, or whatever else. But the question that hovers over all this is, what does a man gain? Well, a man doesn't gain anything. But wisdom is still profitable for someone. Not because it can create a time that you want. Remember, the times are created by God. But wisdom is good because it can take advantage of the now. So how does wisdom take advantage of the now? That's our last part today. And he says this, verse 11, he's made everything beautiful in its time. He's put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. Verse 12, I perceive that there is nothing better for them, you and me, than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Well, that's pretty good, isn't it? There's nothing better for us than to be joyful and to do good. And also that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in his toil, for this is God's gift to man. That future that's out there, and we are afraid it's coming. We're afraid of loss. We're afraid of failure. We're afraid we're not going to get what we want. Maybe we're afraid we are going to get what we want. And so we do all these things, and we toil and we labor and we do all this stuff to try to get that future that we want. And we think that one day joy is deferred. It's something that's in the future. But what the writer has the audacity to tell us is that joy is not necessarily something that is deferred. Joy is available in the daily gifts, the simplicity of life. I can have forgiveness of sins today. Jesus is with me today. He's with me in my struggles today. He's with me now. And all I have is the now. And there's a certain simplicity and joy in that living in that nowness but not for that nowness gives us. Living in the moment but not for the moment. So there's a song that actually, the lyrics of a song, that I think help illustrate this. And actually the song comes from the dance genre of music. And I know what you're thinking. You're going, Bruce likes dance music. I will admit it is not my favorite genre. However, yes, so you should not judge a book by its cover. I do like dance music, but I should qualify the dance music that I like and that I will share a lyric from you today is from the 19th century. None of this electronica stuff. Not judging, but if you just like to listen to noise, you can listen to that. But if you really want something of value, you have to go back, see. And the 19th century is a good place to start. This is actually dance music. And this dance music comes from a group, a Christian group that I would not normally take much theological direction from. There's no more of them. And it's the Shakers. And you may or may not know about the Shakers. They were central, particularly in New England, but they spread south as well. And one of the big things that they're called Shakers is because they used to dance and shake or quake. And one of the songs that they wrote is a very famous song. It's become a famous American melody. It was later written to become the Lord of the Dance song. But originally it was simply called Simple Gifts. And I want to read just the first two verses of it. They were the original verses when it was written. Other verses were added later. And I think it illustrates quite well, actually, what the author is inviting you and I to do today. Here's how it goes. 'Tis the gift to be simple. 'Tis the gift to be free. 'Tis the gift to come down where we ought to be. And when we find ourselves in the place just right, 'twill be in the valley of love and delight. When true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend we shan't be ashamed. To turn will be our delight, till by turning, we come round right. So, what are we learning here? First of all, it's a gift to be simple. It's not easy. And that's true. I mean, that's really what the writer is trying to tell us here. It's very simple advice. I perceive that there's nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. 'Tis a gift to be free. To be free from trying to control the future, trying to control and mitigate against all the things that we're afraid of. And I like this one. 'Tis the gift to come down where we ought to be. Because we can live in the clouds. We can live our entire lives for potential futures or haunted by pasts that we can't go to. The future is unwritten. We can't write it. God's going to write it. He's going to be with us in it. He's going to make it beautiful in His time. The past is over. We have to be generous. We have to forgive. We have to move on. And it is a gift to be able to come down into the present and be right where we ought to be. And when we find ourselves in the place just right, this is actually very, very much close to what Koheleth is saying about wisdom. Wisdom cannot control the times, but it has the insight to know when they're here. It has the insight to know what time you're in. There's a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down, a time to build up, a time to weep, a time to laugh. Wisdom knows the time that God has ordained and does take advantage. It finds joy and does good in the time that it has. And then we'll be in the valley of love and delight. Again, joy comes when we are able to live with this simplicity. So that's really what I'm inviting you to do today. By the way, the second verse about bowing and bending and turning, those were actually dance instructions. But they do have a metaphorical quality to them as well. We can turn from our sins and things like that. But that's reading heavily into the piece. Those were just dance instructions. Well, anyway, to close up, it's so hard to be simple, isn't it? And yet, the advice of Koheleth is, be grateful for what God's given you today. Don't live in the future of more. I got to get. I got to gain. Or what happens if this, and what happens about that, and what happens about this. All you have is today. It's a gift. And if you can embrace that gift, then that is the simple joy that comes. And learning to embrace God's promises and God's gifts is also a great thing. I will put in the link at the on the Christ Hold Fast page of this video, a link to the song Simple Gifts if you don't know it. The version that I picked is by Yo-Yo Ma and Alison Krauss, and they sing it slower than it would have been done in the original, but at least you can hear the song if you're not familiar with it. I thank you for joining me today, and I hope you can embrace the gift that comes in simplicity, but also knowing that God ordains the times, is in today. He's in today. He's Emmanuel with you, and He is making everything beautiful in its time. Have a wonderful, simple